Okay, just back here,
Oh,
Mark.
for goodness
Just back
sake.
here.
Oh, what? No wonder I couldn't see you before the service. Does your wife know you're wearing that?
It's a couple of sizes too big, eh? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, a couple of sizes too big.
Yeah. Do you like? I thought we were all wearing our favourite Christmas suit today, didn't?
No.
Is it just me that got the memo?
Yeah, well, we actually made it only to you.
Oh dear.
So,
do you like it?
Welcome.
Is it? This could be a new fashion thing, right?
A new fashion thing.
Yeah.
Let's not put this one on Facebook.
Yeah.
Hey, well, welcome our senior pastor.
Is the preaching table around?
Would you like it?
Yeah, that might be a good thing to have around. Thank you. I thought we were all going to dress up like this, though. Man, I can imagine, though, that you guys would all be really keen to walk around like Sylvia Park Mall with me like this straight after the service, right? I can imagine straight afterwards there's going to be like a queue of people out there wanting like some selfies to put on Instagram to let all of your friends know this is your pastor, you know, and you're really proud to have me as your pastor, right? Thanks, Nate. Right. Now, I mean, most of you, wouldn't want to do any of those kind of selfies with me today, and if I was in your shoes, I would be exactly the same. Because I stand out way too much, don't I? Way too much colour today. A little on the weird side. It's obvious that I just don't fit. And let's face it, a whole lot of people around us just don't fit. They stand out, not because they wear some kind of weird suit, but they stand out because there's something distinct about them. I'm referring, of course, to the people that tend to be whispered about, in the staff room, around by the coffee machine or the water cooler. The people that you tended to stay away from at that end of it. Yeah, thanks. It's already going up on Facebook. Thanks, Kay. Think about the people that were even at the end of the year function for you. The people you wanted to stay away from. Or you eventually had to have a conversation, but you tried to get out of the conversation because they were like way too colourful to associate with, and you wanted to pull away from them. The people in your workplace or school that tend to be a little on the isolated side. The family members that you wish you could kind of like edit out of your family tree because they're, again, way too colourful and they stand out. So what do we do with the person who's too colourful? In your family, in your group of friends, your colleagues, the group of people that you want to kind of, if you're honest, kind of push to one side. What do we do with that person who stands out, but for all the wrong reasons? So as you stare at me today, or perhaps try to avoid staring at me today, and as you sit there wondering, what in the world was JD thinking wearing that Christmas suit? I want you to keep this question loud and clear in your minds. How am I meant to respond to that person who's too colourful for me to be around? You with me? So this Christmas story that we're going to look at today provides a really clear answer to how we treat the really colourful, weird people that are around us. And it does so by giving a family tree of Jesus. Now, I imagine that all of us in our living rooms right now have a Christmas tree up in our homes. Even Nathan Palmer, who spoke a couple of weeks ago, has finally bought a Christmas tree with Alana, so his marriage is saved. But, we often associate Christmas, don't we, with a Christmas tree. But what I want you to see today is the ultimate tree that best represents Christmas is really the family tree of Jesus. This is what we see in the very first few verses of the New Testament. This is what Matthew points out to us. And you're not going to find these verses from Matthew in some kind of Christmas card because the words aren't all that riveting. But if you take the time to kind of dig beneath the surface of this family tree, you find this story, or really a group of stories, that are unbelievably compelling. So we should be used to family trees, right? I mean, even in our Māori culture, there's this idea of whakapapa. And Māoris will advocate, ask me who I am, and I will tell you about my family. For Māori, identity is wrapped up in your people and who you are, in your family line. And before you look at my line of accomplishments, my line of work, or my line of credit, I will give you my family line, my family tree. This is who I am. And so if I was taking the time to unpack my whakapapa, my family tree, I would tell you some things like this. So here's some, I would say, ko Stanley Dove or ko Betty Dove, oku matua. These are my parents, in other words. Ko Christine Rua, ko Janelle oku tuahini. These are my sisters, in other words. Ko Robin Hockley toku hua waihini. This is my bride on the right. Ko Toby Ratu, ko Arwen, ko Chase, ko Elisha, ko Giselle aku tamariki. These are my children that I'm very happy to be around most of the time. This is my whakapapa, or at least some of my whakapapa. If I had longer, I would include my aunties and uncles and grandparents and great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, because a whakapapa shows where I sit in this whole family line with all these other people, this ongoing story. In fact, when I had a te reo class last year, we all had to share our whakapapas, our pepihas, and we're sitting around the room and we're all kind of sharing, and there was suddenly this aha moment, at least for me, because what happens is people share their family lines, their whakapapa, is you suddenly realize, actually, I know that person. I didn't realize that we had this connection with each other before now, and suddenly you find out where you both fit in that line. And there's this aha moment as you see that you actually belong and connect together. See, whakapapas, family trees, lines, they provide identity. Ask me who I am, I'll tell you about my people. And this Māori understanding of identity is actually very close to a Jewish culture at the time of Jesus. You see, Israelis would sit around the fire and tell stories. And one of their favorite ways of storytelling was to really list down their ancestors and recount their deeds. Remember, these people knew the scriptures, so when they heard the names recalled stories about these people. And as they heard these stories, and as they kind of recounted it all and then kind of came to themselves, it would give them that sense of identity and place. And they would be able to say, I'm not a rootless, illiterate nomad, I'm somebody. And I have a place to belong. I mean, scholars even say to this day in the Middle East, there are tribal nomads who can still recite the names of their ancestors going back centuries. And it's not unusual for them to go on and doing this for like more than an hour or two. So it makes sense, doesn't it, that when Matthew wants to tell us about the identity of Jesus, he presents this whakapapa, this family tree, the genealogy of Jesus. Because effectively, these genealogies serve like a resume. It established who this person is and why you needed to listen to them and associate with them. But I want you to know, before we come to Matthew 1, there's a couple of differences between Jewish genealogies and Māori whakapapa. One of them is that Jewish genealogies didn't feature women. After all, women didn't establish bloodlines, that family names weren't kind of continued through them. Women had few legal rights in the day of Jesus. Another difference is that it wasn't uncommon for people to edit genealogies, your family trees, to edit out the people they didn't want to associate with. And if they were like too colorful, kind of too weird, they would edit them out of their family story. And we know this because even Herod the Great, who was one of the rulers at the time of Jesus, we know he did this with his family tree. He edited out the people that had too many scandals behind them and just stayed with the positives to present himself strongly to the other people around him. So what we're going to see now is that as Matthew presents his whakapapa of Jesus, he kind of breaks the rules of what we expect to happen. And he presents name after name after name to establish Jesus' identity and provide us with these connection points. But he does so with some surprising twists. So let's kind of begin. Let's look at this family tree of Jesus and see how the whole New Testament begins with these words. This is a record of the ancestors of Jesus, the Messiah, a descendant of David and Abraham. Let's just stop there. Because there's a couple of names we immediately recognize, isn't there? David, God had promised that he would raise up this eternal kingdom through the line of David. So it makes absolute sense that Matthew is going to connect Jesus, line right back to David. Because if Jesus isn't related to David, he can't be the Messiah. And then, of course, there's this other highbrow name here, Abraham. Because Matthew is writing to a Jewish group, he wants to establish the Messiah comes from Abraham. Abraham is the father of faith. He's the father of the nation. And the original nation would remember that God had promised to bless the entire world through Abraham's line. So the mention of Abraham, I guess, might spark that hope. Could this be the one? Could this be who we've been longing for our entire lives? So 2 names just so far, and so far we're kind of nodding because this is a really impressive resume, setting up the identity of Jesus. But then the whakapapa continues. Abraham was the father of Isaac. Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah was the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Wait a second. Why would Matthew include Tamar? Didn't I just say earlier that the Jewish people didn't include women in their genealogies? She must have a real story behind her for Matthew to highlight the fact of who this person is. And she certainly does have a story. And I reckon at this point, the original Jewish audience would be raising eyebrows and kind of sinking in their seats because they knew this was an X-rated story that they didn't like to tell. If I was reading actually the story of Tamar here in public, there are verses I would skip over because they're actually too graphic. I'll give you a carefully worded summary from Genesis 38. Judah chose a wife for his son from the Canaanites named Tamar, and he married her off to his eldest boy. Unfortunately, his son passed away. So Judah, as the father-in-law, is obligated to make sure Tamar is taken care of, and that included finding another husband for her in the hope that she might have children who would grow up and look after her in her future. Remember, this is at a day where there's no rights for people and no kind of social welfare scheme, so family was really important. But Judah reneges on his promise. In this culture, Tamar has no legal rights, no idea what to do. So she takes matters into her own hands. She disguises herself as a prostitute, and she waits by the side of the road where she knows her father-in-law will come by. She also knows what sort of guy he is. It's dark, she's veiled, he doesn't recognize her, he sleeps with her. But he's a bit short of cash, so he gives her his staff and seal as a pledge that one day he'll come and pay her. And then he goes home. A few months later, Judah is told that Tamar, his widowed daughter-in-law, is pregnant. He gets all self-righteous and calls for her execution. Tamar is dragged out, but she carries with her Judah's staff and his seal. And she says, all right, but by the way, before you execute me, just know that I'm pregnant by the man who owns this staff and this seal. And she looks at Judah eye to eye and says, do you know who owns the staff and the seal? and Judah suddenly realizes what's happened. He stops the execution and he repents. And Tamar goes on to give birth to these twin boys through incest. And the names are Perez and Zerah. Perez right here is in this whakapapa of Jesus, right here in Matthew chapter 1. So if you think you have problems in your family, look again to this family. I'm sure you can come up with all sorts of words to describe the mess in this family. I'm sure you can imagine the whispers that go on behind the scenes. Because if this was your family, you would want to keep this story out of the public limelight. See, if Matthew was meeting with an editor before his gospel got to be released, I imagine the editor would sit down with him and say, hey Matthew, you need to edit that story of Tamar out. Remember, the whole point of a genealogy is to present the credentials and the identity of Jesus. And if you want to do something radical by including, women in the chronology, sure, go ahead. There's Sarah, there's Rebecca, there's Rachel, there's great heroes of faith among women. But Tamar? How in the world does her story help you? But Matthew, writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he says, yeah, nah, I think we're going to leave Tamar in. Why? I mean, what in the world is he up to? But let's keep on reading. Back to the chronology. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nashron. Nashron was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Another woman. And again, she's not just like any woman. The Israelites were precious about their bloodlines. And this woman's not an Israelite. And it's like Matthew is going out of his way to explain there is non-Jewish blood in the genealogy. On top of that, Rahab used to worship another god. What's more, when you read the book of Joshua, we find that she's a prostitute, or was a prostitute. As a side note, have you noticed in the Bible that there's quite a number of stories about prostitutes? You see, in the ancient world, if a woman was not married and she wasn't under the care of a family, she basically just had three choices. I mean, she could starve to death, she could beg, or she could be a prostitute. No woman at this culture at that time grew up saying, this is what I want to be. But it happened because of the way society was. Now, Rahab, she lived in this house. It was out on the part of the city wall. I think it describes a lot about who she is. She's one of those people that didn't quite fit where she was because of what she did. She lived right on the edge, on the margin, not quite inside the city, not quite outside the city. There's a lot of people who are just like that, right? You can probably picture some of those people around you, trying to fit in, but realizing they just don't fit. About 500 years have gone by since Tamar was on the scene. The nation of Israel is growing and they're on the move and they're about to come in the promised land to set up homes. So Joshua sends out these spies to check out Jericho. And they end up in Rahab's place. Rahab suddenly discovers who they are. And rather than reporting them to her people, she finds that her heart is strangely open to God. So when her people come by trying to find these spies, she risks her life and lies on their behalf. It's this amazing story of faith. But you stop and you look at what Matthew's trying to do and you go, why in the world, Matthew, would you include her story in this genealogy of Jesus? I mean, sure, she believed that God was to be followed. But prior to that, she was a Canaanite. She was a prostitute. She was a worshiper of another god. I mean, Matthew, how in the world does that serve your purposes of trying to show the identity of Jesus and why we would want to follow Jesus? Surely edit her out. Well, perhaps this causes you, though, to start thinking about people that you work with or study with. People actually in your own family histories. Again, the people that just don't fit because they're too colorful. The people we wish we could edit out. You know, maybe the story is going to say something about how we treat these colorful characters. But Matthew carries on. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Another woman. I mean, Ruth lost her husband in a famine, but she remained loyal to her mother-in-law by the name of Naomi. And God in his goodness blessed her with a new husband named Boaz. This is a great love story you can read about later from the Hebrew Scriptures. But there's something else we need to know about Ruth. You see, Ruth wasn't just a Gentile, she was a Moabite. And the Jews did not have a high opinion of the Moabites. The Moabites came about through this incestuous relationship between Lot and one of his daughters. Their very existence was repugnant to the Jewish people. In fact, here in Deuteronomy is one of the laws that governed the worship of God in Israel. It says, no Ammonite or Moabite shall enter the assembly of the Lord. None of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall ever enter the assembly of the Lord. And can you hear Matthew's editor saying, Matthew, remember you're writing to Jewish people and you're placing Ruth in this line. She's a Moabitess. And you're saying the line leading up to the Messiah includes a Moabite. And Matthew stubbornly just says, yeah, nah, I'm gonna leave her in this story. So far, just think about what we have. We've got a lady who pretended to be a prostitute and had sex with her father-in-law. A lady who actually was a prostitute and betrayed her own people. And we've got a lady who came from the most hated nation that only existed because of this incestuous family relationship. It's quite a family tree, isn't it? But Matthew isn't done yet. Goes on. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of King David. King David, finally, back to him. Somebody that we finally know about, somebody with great standing. Phew. Because the Jews loved David. He was a man after God's own heart. The Messiah was promised to come from his line. He's the one that slayed that so-called giant and wrote many of the Psalms. And then Matthew adds this. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother was Bathsheba, the widow of Uriah. You see, Matthew wasn't even going to mention David without telling us the whole story. The story that involved David getting Uriah's wife pregnant. And to cover up what he had done, he had Uriah killed in the front lines of battle. It's this tragic story of lust and adultery and murder. Now, again, if you sit back, you expect Matthew to tell the very best stories, to give the very best credentials of Jesus. And he certainly does that with a mention of people like Abraham and David in some parts of the story. But it's like he's gone out of his way, doesn't it? To highlight the skeletons in the closet. That instead of simply presenting this hall of fame, he's also presenting this hall of shame. And in case you think he's just picking on women here, remember the stories of these women really just highlight the bad behavior of these guys. But there's also other guys in the story. Behind the 40 names that are mentioned, there are colorful stories of messed up monarchs and battling brothers. There's more than a feud or two. There's mentions like kings like Manasseh, who Scripture describes as one of the most evil kings in the history of Judah. He even had his own son sacrificed in a fire to a foreign god. It's a hideous story. You see, the audience would expect Matthew to highlight, even exaggerate the positive traits and avoid anything and anyone that might be too colorful. Remember, we know Herod the Great at the time of Jesus edited people from his family tree. So it was a practice that people did. But instead, Matthew goes out of his way, name after name, culminating in the climax of this whakapapa. Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Mary gave birth to Jesus, who was called the Messiah. In other words, this is a record of the people of Jesus Christ. But the people who Jesus belongs to are not the people you might think about. The people that Jesus is going to identify with and love and let into his kingdom are not going to look like what everybody is expecting them to look like. See, from the beginning of his gospel, Matthew is warning people not to think in kind of religious, respectable ways. Instead, he's saying to them, now things are going to get a little scandalous now. There are going to be some colorful stories you might think should be buried to stay buried. And you might have thought that some people shouldn't belong, that some people should be excluded. But Matthew knows something else about this family tree. He knows that it does not stop after Jesus is born. Rather, he knows there's more stories to tell. There's more people to include. See, Matthew knows that Jesus welcomes anybody and everybody into his family. As you heard last week, God doesn't have a one-size-fits-all definition of family. Rather, his family is inclusive and full of diversity. It's made up of people from different countries and careers, diverse postcodes, various backgrounds, a generational spread that includes both millennials and boomers. And Jesus wants everybody, anybody to be included in his family. Hittites and Moabites and Canaanites and Jerichoites and Hinduites and New Ageites and prostituteites and consumerites and CEOites. Well, anybody that there is. In other words, every single person can find a place to belong in a relationship with Jesus. See, Matthew knew this from personal experience. He had heard that Jesus was a friend of sinners and tax collectors. And at the time, that phrase wasn't a compliment. Tax collectors, for instance, were the loan sharks of the day. They took advantage of people in a time of poverty. Typically, they were wealthy. Rome would grant them all their favors. And in return, these tax collectors would take off a little bit off the top of these poor people that already didn't have anything. They were despised by those around them, just like we have very low thoughts about loan sharks today. Guess what occupation Matthew had prior to following Jesus? He was a tax collector. I mean, he knew his own stories. He knew what it was like to be excluded. See, if anyone had a reason to feel like they didn't belong, it was Matthew. Matthew had endured all sorts of comments about him. I mean, he saw people whispering about him in the far corners. He knew no one wanted to associate with him in the mall because he was a colorful character, unlike so many others. But one day Jesus came right up to him and included him and asked him to be part of his family. I mean, Matthew? He says, no one had ever welcomed Matthew like this before. And Matthew responded. And he left his past behind him. And in Jesus, he found a place to belong. My guess is that Matthew smiled every single time he inserted one of these characters. I imagine him like chuckling away as he thinks to himself why he's mentioning Tamar and Rahab and Ruth and Bathsheba and Manasseh. See, Matthew is deliberately making a point that Jesus surrounds himself with lives who are messy and broken and colorful and dysfunctional. And the story of Jesus and the story of Christmas is a story of a God who brings people close so that they can find a place to belong. See, friends, the ultimate Christmas tree that represents Christmas is not the Christmas tree in our living rooms, but it's this family tree of Jesus. It's the family tree that provides a place for everybody to belong. I mean, you might even imagine that family tree or even that Christmas tree in your room and just think of the branches coming out them like family trees. And there are branches right now that don't have anybody's name next to them. And Jesus wants every branch to include somebody's name. He wants everybody to be accepted, which means we have people to accept. So let's wrestle with this for a moment. See, all of us have people in our lives who are prickly, difficult, hard work, people that dress in weird ways that are around us. People who are just plain hard work to talk to and live with. And no, this is not the time to eyeball somebody next to you and elbow them as if they are that dysfunctional person. It might be somebody we live with, it might be somebody we work with, it might be somebody we study with. It might be a relative who's going to be with us this year and we're like sighing, thinking about how they're going to be around our table this year. It might be an in-law. I mean, that's why there's a whole lot of in-law jokes, right? Because in-laws often do know the buttons they can press in our lives. And you might look at me as having it all together, at least until I had the suit on today. But you see, if I wrote a script of my wider family, I mean, you would know it has all the makings of this amazing movie with colorful characters, the suspense, the plot lines, everything going on. And I like to avoid it all. I like to kind of keep it all buried under the carpet. And I can come up with good reasons to avoid some of them even today. Just as you might come up with reasons about the people that you're around to. But friends, eventually we have to grapple with this desire of Jesus to include everybody in his family tree. You see, the line of Jesus is as bad as it can get. I mean, incest, prostitution, affair, deception, murder. And if this is his family line, it means that he understands something about my family line and about your family line. And not only does he understand, but he's able to bring Christmas hope and joy to the messiness that exists between all of the dysfunction in our families, in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods. Because if Jesus is able to accept such people, I mean, surely it means it's time for you and for me to accept people in the same way. Jesus doesn't endorse what any of these people do, but he welcomes them anybody, everybody, into this life-transforming relationship with him. And I sense the Spirit of God elbowing not a few of us right now, whispering, what will it take? What will it take for you to see that person as I see them? Yes, I know you've been trying to avoid them, but what will it take for you to actually leave the hurts of 2019 behind you as you move into 2020? What will it take for you to pray that they would be grafted into that branch this year? Perhaps this can be a line in the sand moment for you as you look to the future. See, there are people on our streets and people that aren't yet connected, but Jesus wants a connection to be made. He wants us to be leading people from way out there in secular Kiwi society, people enmeshed in lives of materialism and consumerism and sexual confusions, people captured by a lifestyle with empty promises, and he wants them included into his family tree. Because he knows there are empty branches right now with their name waiting to be included. So friends, why not extend an open invitation around your table this season? Why not have a barbecue in the new year and invite your neighbors? Wasn't it around a table that Jesus would pull up a chair to invite somebody else? Wasn't it around a table where he would provide a place for them to belong? Wasn't it the place where he would befriend others? And this time of the year, it's so much easier to make those invites than any other time. And it's like people's hearts are more open to God at this time of the year, more open to think about spiritual things. So what might it take for you to seize the season to create a place to help others belong? After all, the Messiah is still searching for people who are not yet part of his family, from prostitutes to beggars to kings and CEOs and everybody in between. He's still looking for people and calling them to come home, to find a place to belong in his family tree. What's more, he's inviting you and me to find a place to belong. See, many people feel today like they don't belong, and you might be in that situation too. And if you are, you can probably come up with like 1,001 reasons why you don't belong or why you don't feel like you belong. But Jesus is not the one excluding any of us. Instead, Jesus goes out of his way to provide a place where everybody can belong. Again, the whole reason Matthew has placed this whakapapa at the very beginning of the New Testament is because he wants us to know who the people are that Jesus wants to associate with. And not only does he want us to reach out to them, but he wants us to know that Jesus wants us to belong. You and me are included. We have a place where we can love and be loved. That our identity is not tied up in our line of work or our line of accomplishments or our line of credit. It's now tied out to this new family line, and we are grafted into this family tree of Jesus. And our name is written on that family tree of Jesus with all of our story and baggage associated with it because Jesus associates with us. It's like the loops we saw earlier as we kind of see our names all kind of coming together and ascending. We are all included in this family. The one who holds it all together is our Heavenly Father. And yes, there's positive traits, but there's also quirky traits. But all coming together, all connected in this faith family. And Jesus is not ashamed of any one of us. He includes every single person, including me dressed up in this weird suit today. He still wants to associate with me. And he continues to invite us to become part of this family of God. He wants to call you his daughter, his son. He wants you to carry on the family name. One of the accounts of Jesus puts it this way. To all who believed him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. And they are reborn, not with a physical birth resulting from human passion or plan, but a birth that comes from God. God bringing us into this family tree. God desiring relationship with us. And he's pursuing us He's creating moment after moment after moment, and this desire for us to stop and spend time with him, to accept this relationship. But that invitation requires us to respond. You know, the words in this verse talk about to those who believe, to those who accepted. That means we need to actually talk to Jesus in this belief that he's here and alive and able to listen to us. It means that we share our lives with him and the pressures that we're feeling and the awkwardness about some of the family members and friends that are going to be around us this year, talking to him about that and taking his name for our identity, that I'm a child of God. I'm a follower of Jesus. See, all of us could identify reasons why we don't belong. But it's like Jesus goes through every one of those reasons and just kind of crosses them out. And instead, he pulls up a seat at his table and he says, come and sit here right beside me. There is ample room at my table. I'd like to invite the ushers to come up now to start passing out the bread and cups as we take communion, reminding us that this is exactly what Jesus is doing, including us at his table. None of us are excluded. All of us can find a place to belong. All we need to do is respond and say, Jesus, I'm going to sit at your table. I want a relationship with you. So as the ushers pass around the bread and cups this morning, if you can take a piece of bread, if you can take a cup, just hold it in your hand. Take a moment to talk with Jesus today about what it looks like to find a place to belong. In a moment, I'll lead us in a prayer.